You are not merely a bride. You are Princess Seraphina, the rightful queen.
Aye, that is my name.
The first thing they did was scrub the blood off her fingers. Not because they cared that her skin was raw, or because the nails on both her hands had split from clawing at the locked door. They scrubbed them because no bride could walk into a cathedral with crescent moons of dried blood under her nails. No bride could look like she had fought for her life an hour before the wedding. So they held her wrists over a silver basin and rubbed until the water turned pink. "Stop shaking," one of the women hissed. She tried. God, she tried. But every time she steadied one hand, the other began to tremble harder. By noon, the bells of Valadorn would ring across the capital. By sunset, the whole kingdom would believe she had married a king. And if she refused, her little brother would be dead before the last bell faded. Her name, as far as she had known for 19 years, was Mara. Mara from the river quarter. Mara from St. Oran's orphan house. Mara with the stitched-up hems, the quick hands, and the habit of lowering her eyes whenever noblemen passed by, because girls like her learned early that being noticed was rarely a blessing. She had spent the last 3 years working in the palace sewing rooms, bending over gowns she would never wear, repairing sleeves that cost more than everything she had owned in childhood. She was good at it. Quiet. Invisible. The kind of person a palace forgets is there, even while she stands in the middle of it. Invisible until the real bride disappeared. That morning had begun like every other royal disaster began in places no one wrote songs about. In whispering corridors, behind locked doors, with men in fine velvet speaking through their teeth while servants were shoved out of the way. Lady Celestine of House Dacre, the king's bride-to-be, had vanished before dawn. Some said she fled. Some said she was taken. Some said she had thrown herself from the Western Tower rather than marry a man the kingdom feared more than it loved. No one told Mara which rumor was true. They only dragged her from the sewing chamber because she had been the last one altering the wedding dress, and because, under 6 layers of lace and jewels and a cathedral veil that hid half her face, she was close enough. Close enough to lie. The Lord Chancellor himself had come for her, which was how she knew this was worse than madness. Lord Halvern never walked anywhere without other men making space first. He was one of those pale, dry-faced men who seemed built from paper and knives. His beard was trimmed too neatly. His voice was always soft. Men like that never shouted. They didn't need to. When Mara had been thrown to her knees in the antechamber, Halvern crouched in front of her, as if speaking kindly to a child. "Listen carefully," he said. "You are going to save this kingdom." She stared at him, breathing hard. "I'm a seamstress." "No. Today, you are Lady Celestine." "I can't." "You can. I don't know how she walks, how she speaks." "You won't need to speak much. The veil will cover your face. The vows are short. The ceremony is scripted. You will do exactly as you are told." Mara looked at the guards by the door. "And when it's over?" His smile never reached his eyes. "Then your brother receives the medicine he needs, and you both go on living." Something cold slid through her ribs. "Tomas," she whispered. Halvern tilted his head. "You didn't think we would leave such matters to chance." Her brother had been ill for weeks. A fever in the lungs. The palace physician had only agreed to see him because Mara had spent months doing extra work for the underhouse staff and begging favors from people who rarely gave them. Tomas was 11. Too thin, too stubborn. The kind of boy who apologized for coughing, because he didn't want to be a burden. "Where is he?" Mara asked. "Safe," Halvern said. "For now." She lunged at him then, pure instinct, and one of the guards struck her hard enough to split her lip on her own teeth. That was where the blood on her fingers came from. Now she sat in front of a mirror taller than the room she had grown up in, while women pinned pearls into her hair and painted color onto a face gone pale with terror. The dress was impossible. She knew that dress better than anyone alive. She had spent 12 nights sewing the silver thread into the bodice by candlelight until her eyes blurred. She had reattached crystals with bleeding fingertips after Lady Celestine complained the neckline wasn't regal enough. She had cursed the weight of the train, the absurdity of the sleeves, the fact that no human being could breathe naturally once laced into it. Now it swallowed her whole. There was a bruise blooming along her jaw. One of the women dusted powder over it without comment. Mara stared at her own reflection and saw a stranger being assembled piece by piece. A handmaiden behind her muttered, "The king will know." Another answered, "Not before the vows. He notices everything." Then pray he notices too late. They went silent when Mara lifted her eyes toward them. That was the worst part. Not one of them looked sorry. Afraid, yes. Desperate, certainly. But sorry? No. Because to everyone in that room, she was not a girl being marched into a lie. She was a tool. A patch over a crack in the wall. Something expendable, being used to hold the kingdom together for one more day. Outside the chamber, bells rang the quarter hour. Mara swallowed and tried not to be sick. She thought of Tomas. She thought of the last thing he had said that morning before palace guards dragged her away from the infirmary corridor. "Don't cry, Mara. If you cry, I'll think I'm dying." He had tried to grin when he said it, tried to make her laugh. Instead, she had kissed his hot forehead and promised him she would be back before evening. Now she didn't know if she'd live long enough to keep that promise. An older woman entered just as the final clasp was being fastened. She was bent at the shoulders, carrying a box of ceremonial jewelry, her face folded with the kind of age that had seen too much and spoken too little about it. Mara recognized her vaguely, one of the women from the old royal wing, someone who rarely came to the newer chambers. "Her veil chain," one maid said. "Hurry." The old woman came closer, and for one strange second, the whole room seemed to pause. Her eyes landed on Mara's face, then on the small mark beneath Mara's left ear, just where the powder had failed to cover the crescent-shaped birthmark she'd had since infancy. The woman's breath caught. The old woman's hands shook as she fastened the chain beneath Mara's chin. Her fingers brushed the birthmark below Mara's ear and went still. "My lady," she whispered. Halvern crossed the room in 2 strides. "Enough!" The woman blinked as if waking from a dream, but he was already staring at Mara with something colder than surprise. Recognition. In that moment, Mara understood that he had not chosen her only because she fit the dress. There was another reason. An hour later, the procession began. No one had prepared her for the sound, not the bells, not the choir. It was the crowd that struck her hardest. Thousands cheering for a marriage they believed meant peace. Peace after famine. Peace after war. Peace after years of executions, trials, and rumors that the king had become iron-hearted. At the top of the cathedral steps waited King Lucian Arcturus Vale, tall, severe, dark ceremonial coat, a sword at his side even on his wedding day, a scar through one eyebrow. He did not look like a man awaiting romance. He looked like a man waiting for the truth. Mara walked toward him under a veil of silver lace, her heart pounding so violently she thought she might faint before she reached the altar. The priest began the vows, speaking of kingdoms, peace, duty, and blessing. Then he turned to the bride. "State your name before God and crown." This was the line Halvern had forced her to rehearse. She opened her lips. "Celestine." "Look at me," the king said quietly. She froze. "Say it again." "Celestine are—" "No." The single word cut through the cathedral like steel. Before she could breathe, the king lifted the veil. Gasps burst across the chamber. Not because Mara was hideous, not because she was an obvious imposter, but because half the court knew exactly who she resembled. The king's eyes never left her face. "This woman," he said to the whole cathedral, "is not Lady Celestine of House Docker." Chaos erupted. Halvern stepped forward at once, righteous fury painted across his features. "Your Majesty, this girl is a deceiver. Seize her." Mara stared at him in disbelief. Of course. If anything failed, she would become the criminal. Then something inside her snapped. "I didn't choose this," she cried, the words breaking from her before fear could stop them. "They took me from the sewing rooms this morning. They said the real bride was gone, and if I didn't obey, my brother would die." Whispers roared through the nobles. Halvern called her a liar, but Mara lifted her head for the first time in her life and did not lower her eyes. "You threatened Tomas," she said. "You said I would wear the veil and speak the vows, or they would bury him before nightfall." The king raised a hand, and no one moved. Mara was shaking now, but once the truth began, she could not stop. "My name is Mara," she said. "Mara from St. Oran's. If you mean to hang someone for this, hang me. But don't let him lie and call it duty." Then the king spoke the sentence that changed everything. "No," he said, voice cold and clear. "What humiliates this crown is that you expected me not to recognize her." The cathedral fell into a silence so deep it felt larger than stone. He stepped closer. "Mara," he said, tasting the name. "That is not the name you were born with." She stared at him. "Your real name," he declared, "is Ilara Isolde Rowan, daughter of Queen Isolde Rowan, last surviving child of House Rowan, stolen from the palace 19 years ago on the night of the Ashfire conspiracy and hidden under another name while traitors declared you dead." History detonated around her. Queen Isolde, the dead queen, the erased bloodline, the royal child lost to fire and treachery. No, impossible. But then the cathedral doors opened, and the old woman from the bridal chamber entered between royal guards, carrying a small carved box. Nurse Agnes, former royal nurse to the infant princess, long believed dead. She knelt not before the king, but before Mara. "My lady," she whispered through tears, "I prayed I would live long enough to see this day." From the box, she lifted a tiny gold bracelet, blackened by old fire, engraved with a crescent moon and the letters E-I-R. "The child had a crescent mark beneath her ear," Agnes said. "The queen used to kiss it and say the moon had signed her daughter before the world saw her." Mara's hand rose instinctively to the birthmark.
1,000 broken memories flashed through her. A lullaby, fear in her mother's eyes, the command to answer only to Mara. What she had thought was panic now sounded like sacrifice. The king produced records, ledgers, payments, sealed testimonies, and proof that Halvern had buried witnesses, hidden the princess, and silenced Mara's mother when she tried to speak. "My mother knew," Mara whispered. Agnes nodded. "She found you and chose compassion over safety. She hid you, raised you, and died protecting the secret." When Mara looked at Halvern again, he was no longer merely angry. He was afraid, which made him dangerous. Then came the final blow. "The real Lady Celestine has been found," the king announced. Alive, drugged, hidden under Halvern's seal. The cathedral did not erupt. It detonated. Halvern's hand moved fast.
He seized a dagger from a guard and locked one arm around Mara's throat, dragging her back against him. Cold steel touched her skin. "There," he snarled. "Look how quickly fantasies bleed." Swords flashed. Nobles stumbled away. The priest dropped in terror. "Release her," the king said. Halvern laughed. "If she lives, the kingdom fractures. One dead girl is a cheap price." Then he shouted, "Bring the boy." The side doors opened, and Tomas was dragged into the cathedral, pale, barefoot, barely strong enough to stand. For one instant, Mara stopped feeling the blade at her throat. "Tomas!" He looked up, frightened beyond words. Something broke inside her then. Not her courage, her obedience. All day, every choice had been made through fear. Walk, or the boy dies. Smile, or the boy dies. Lie, or the boy dies. Now, seeing Tomas used like an object, Mara found a voice fiercer than terror. "No more," she said. Halvern tightened his grip, but she spoke clearly enough for the whole room to hear. "I don't care what name I was born with. Mara, Ilara, princess, seamstress. None of it means anything if boys like him can be dragged from a sickbed so powerful men can keep their hands clean." Then she looked at the nobles, at the king, at the kingdom that had stepped over people like her all its life. "If this crown needs lies to survive," she said, "then let it crack. If blood is the price for truth, then stop spending hours first." Something moved through the court. Not magic. Conscience. The king's gaze locked on hers. Mara drew one steady breath. "Let my brother go. I will vanish if that's what saves him." But the king shook his head. "No," he said. "There has been enough vanishing in this kingdom." He drew his sword. What followed became flashes of motion. A northern envoy barked in order. His men moved on Tomas's captors. The king crossed the distance with terrifying speed. Steel rang through the cathedral. Then Halvern was on the floor, wrist pinned beneath the king's boot, the dagger skidding away. The king's sword rested at Halvern's throat. "All these years," Lucian said quietly, "you mistook patience for blindness." He rose and addressed the court. "Lord Chancellor Halvern is stripped of title, office, estate, and protection under Crown law. He will answer publicly for murder, conspiracy, concealment of the surviving princess, abduction, coercion, and attempted murder within sacred ceremony." Guards took Halvern away. Only then did Mara realize she was swaying. She turned, searching desperately until she saw Tomas alive, frightened, but alive. Her knees gave way. The king caught her before she could fall. "You're safe," he said. Those words nearly undid her. Then, before the whole cathedral, King Lucian Vale turned to her and bowed his head. Not theatrically, truly. "To Ilara Isolde Rowan," he said, "wronged daughter of this kingdom, I offer not apology alone. I offer protection, restoration of name, and the choice denied you today. Freely." For the first time all day, no one was forcing words into her mouth. She chose the truest ones. "I want my brother," she whispered. Something like a smile touched the king's face. Then let that be the first order obeyed. Tomas was brought to her at once, and he clung to her with the full, stubborn force of a child who had almost been lost. In the days that followed, the truth spread through the kingdom like fire through dry grass. Lady Celestine was found alive. Halvern's allies began to fall. Old records were opened. Hidden names were restored. Servants, laundresses, guards, and poor women long erased by history were finally spoken aloud. When the trial came, Ilara stood in plain dress, not royal silk. Asked to state her name for the record, she paused only once. Then she said, "Ilara Isolde Rowan, also called Mara by the woman who kept me alive." She wanted both truths written down, because she belonged to both. Tomas recovered slowly with proper food, medicine, and rest. The king brought Ilara boxes of records and said, "If you are to decide what comes next, you deserve the whole truth, not the polished version." And little by little, something dangerous and tender grew between them. Not because history liked symmetry, not because politics required a crown beside a crown, but because he had once stood in a cathedral built for lies and given her back her name. When pressure rose for a new marriage alliance, Lucian told her quietly, "I would rather lose 3 kingdoms than become another man making your choices for you." That mattered more than any vow. Spring came. Orphan houses were funded. Hunger was treated as policy failure, not moral weakness. Servants' testimony became admissible in royal inquiry. Old purge records were unsealed. Invisible people began, at last, to be seen. One evening in the lower garden, beside white roses and while Tomas built a ridiculous fort nearby, Lucian asked Ilara to walk with him. No counsel, no witnesses, just him. "I do not love you because of bloodline," he said, "or because the realm would approve. I love that you looked at a room full of power and chose your brother. I love that after everything stolen from you, you became neither cruel nor obedient." Ilara looked at her scarred hands, hands that had stitched, survived, and learned to choose. "When I was little," she said softly, "my mother told me names can be cages if other people use them to own you. But they can also be doors if someone says them like they mean you no harm." Lucian answered in a whisper, "Ilara." It was the way he said it. True. She reached for his hand. "Yes," she said. Not to a throne, not to a strategy. To him. Their real wedding, months later, was nothing like the first. No hostage brother, no hidden bride, no knife, no veil over her face. When the priest asked her to state her name, the cathedral leaned in once more. She smiled. "Ilara Isolde Rowan," she said, "raised in love as Mara." Years later, the songs would get almost everything wrong. They would say a hidden princess was rescued by a king. They would say destiny put a crown back where it belonged. They would say love solved what politics broke. But the truth was harder and better. A frightened girl was dragged toward an altar to be used. A sick little boy became the line she would no longer let power cross. A king chose truth over convenience in a room built for lies. And a stolen name, once spoken aloud, became the beginning of justice. Because sometimes the most powerful moment in a kingdom is not when someone is crowned. It is when someone who was meant to disappear is finally seen.